Getting better results from generative AI often comes down to the quality or creativity of your prompts, meaning the questions you ask, the commands you give. There's an idea called prompt engineering. Now, this can mean different things to different people, but let's just take it as the idea of applying some structure and formality and thought to our interactions with generative AI in order to steer it towards the results we want. And when we don't get the results we want, how we then interact with the system and how we refine and rephrase those prompts. There's this idea that with slight changes in the way you ask for things, you'll get very different results. Some of the most common suggestions to incorporate in your prompts include the idea of a specific persona or profession, where you can tell an LLM to act as if it's a type of person. It can be a job role, act as a marketing copywriter, act as a physics professor, act as a financial advisor. You can even ask for specific people like historical figures or fictional characters. But there's one thing I personally find very useful here, which is the idea of flipping the roles. Here's what I mean. See, I see a lot of suggestions to use generative AI in a way that tries to replace the person writing the prompt. For example, I write and teach technical content, and a lot of people recommend that I might begin my prompts with words like act as an experienced instructor, act as a skilled trainer, act as an expert educator. I hate this recommendation. I am the experienced instructor. That's my job. I want Gen AI to help me, not replace me. And I don't like the internal message I'd be sending my own brain that I have a core competency, let me just give it to the machine. Now, you can do this, but don't be annoyed at generative AI for taking your job if you're literally handing it over. But what's the alternative? Well, we can flip this around. Don't ask ChatGPT to act as an instructor. Instead, tell it to act as a puzzled learner and ask me 3 questions about joining tables in SQL or how variables in this language compare to variables in that language. I find it far more useful to have generative AI act in this role. And I often don't need the LLM to act in a specific role. I think that's sometimes overused. Just tell it what you need. You can be specific about the audience. Explain as if I'm 10 years old. Write as if you're talking to a room full of software developers. You can also say what the desired tone should be. And I don't just mean formal or casual, but being extremely specific about how you want those results to feel. You can tell it what exact length you want, whether you want a short email or to write 5 tweets, or you need 500 words or 3 paragraphs or 2 sentences. The more specific and creative you can be with the prompts, the more creative and useful your results. Now, in 2023, it was very common to see headlines like this.
Prompt engineering, the hot new skill employers are seeking.
Prompt engineering, the hottest job in tech.
Prompt engineering, the most in-demand profession of the future.
But I already believe this idea of everybody needing to be an expert prompt engineer is becoming less and less important. Now, right now, it is important to be comfortable with writing generative AI prompts, but the tools themselves are quickly improving on this. They're taking even basic prompts and better reacting to what we're actually asking for. And it might sound like an odd thing to say, but the prompts were never the most important part of this. What's more important is your approach to them, not worrying about the perfect prompt, but keeping that attitude of experimentation and revision. And as the tools continue to change and improve, that is much more important. But the single most important thing to feel comfortable with generative AI, where it becomes just more intuitive to recognize what it's good at and what it isn't, is to use it again and again. Just start baking it into your life. So make ChatGPT or Google Bard or Anthropic Claude your homepage. Get into the habit of using generative AI where in the past you might have used a search engine or Wikipedia or even just journaled in your own document. And if you want to go a little deeper, watch another topic in our Generative AI Foundation series. But thanks for joining me. Your public-facing documents, your knowledge base, your product information. Most LLMs weren't trained on that. They don't know anything about it. Next, LLMs have a knowledge cutoff point. They are trained to a specific point in time, and you cannot assume they have up-to-date knowledge about anything. For example, I was recording this as the Paris Olympics were finishing in August 2024. But if I asked Claude about any of the results that had happened for this largest sporting event on the planet, it had no idea, because the data it was trained on at the time was only valid up to April. It was actually kind of refreshing to have a chatbot that admits when it doesn't know something. At least it didn't just try and hallucinate a result. Now, they've only gotten better at this. It is still a problem. You ask a question, and an LLM is going to do its best to generate a realistic and convincing answer. That is not the same as a true answer. And related to this is the idea of a lack of accountability. Even something as simple as just getting a direct and specific attribution. Okay, if the LLM is giving me an answer, where does that answer come from? And depending on your business or your use case, this might be just a nice to have, but it might be essential. If you're using generative AI to help draft contracts or legal documents, you're using it for research or trying to find precedents, you're going to need an LLM that can do better than just saying, trust me, bro, when you ask it for sources. You often need trustable, verifiable citations and source documents. And LLMs typically don't do very well at that. It's not what they're built to do. They're not just databases where you can look something up. And finally, for the moment at least, is the idea of ethical and legal problems. That can include things like algorithmic bias, but also liability issues. So if you build a customer-facing chatbot and that chatbot gives a customer an incorrect answer, a hallucinated answer, is your company then liable for any impact of that? And right now, precedents would suggest yes, probably. And okay, there is some overlap between all these problems, and there's also overlap in the ways that we can deal with them, but it typically relies on having something in addition to just an off-the-shelf LLM. These might not be a big deal. I mean, you don't expect ChatGPT to know about the documents on your own desktop computer. You could tolerate the occasional incorrect answer. If Midjourney gives you a weird image, you can just ask it to generate another one. But when you're using it within a business, these become more significant. And one of the main approaches to deal with them is to use something called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. Now, occasionally people have this misconception that RAG is an alternative to using a large language model like GPT or Gemini or Llama or Claude. It's not. RAG is something we do in addition to having an LLM. It's something we add on. It's a way to provide additional data for that LLM. So just as a very basic overview, in a simple, straightforward generative AI application without RAG, so like a basic chatbot, the user would send a prompt to an application, whether that's a website or a mobile app, and then behind the scenes, the app would forward that on to the LLM to formulate response, to generate that response, and send it back to the user. And this is using only the information the LLM was trained on. But let's say we're now building a custom chatbot we want to use internally within an organization. And we do want it to use it like a regular AI chatbot. We want to use it to revise and summarize and create human-like responses. But also, we want to be able to ask questions specific to our organization about our own data, our own people and projects and customers and products and procedures. So when we add retrieval augmented generation as a technique, this is a way to add a set of additional external data sources. This could be documents, PDFs, FAQs, internal guides, policies, procedures. Could be perhaps transcriptions of video calls or the contents of Slack channels, whatever is important to us and to our business. And then, when the user now sends a prompt to this custom app, the app will first check to see, what are they asking about? Are they asking about just normal chatbot stuff? Or are they asking about that extra relevant company-specific information? And if so, it will first get any additional information from those external data sources, additional facts, additional context. And all that extra information is bundled together with the original prompt, and then it is sent on to the LLM to formulate and structure the response, and finally send that response back to the user. And what this means, done well, is that we get all the benefits of having an LLM, and then we can generate new content. We can generate realistic human-like answers and conversations, but where those results are grounded in our own data, and where we can keep that data up to date. So this helps offset several of those problems I just talked about, like having access to private proprietary data. It has more up-to-date information. It reduces hallucinations. And if we use RAG, we can require that any answer that used that external data must provide attribution, the source of where that answer came from. And while it doesn't completely take care of all ethical or legal issues, it should certainly offset them. Now, I wanted to talk about RAG for a minute or two, even at this basic level, because while this isn't a course on building a retrieval augmented generation application, it is still useful to know what RAG is and how it can help in using generative AI within an organization.